How do you know when to slow down or push forward during a medicine ceremony? That's what I want to explore with you today, because that's what you were studying this week.
Yeah, we were studying how we prepare our clients for our sessions, the preliminary work, and also exploring how to hold space during the sessions. And one of those threads was we were asked the question, how do you know, whether to slow down or whether to push forward? And essentially exploring different ways that you can work with your client through the breath, through movement, by actually bringing them into the dialogue. So by asking them, hey, is this something that you feel like you have the capacity to continue exploring? Or is this
How will they know?
intense?
How do you know if it's time to slow down?
I would be able to communicate that. I think about, even in my deepest moments, I think about our journey in Tulum, even our deepest moments, if I would know, like, maybe I just need to pause and take a breath. Maybe I need somebody to hold my hand. Maybe I don't want to explore that certain thread.
So there's a real element of self-awareness required, and then trust between facilitator and participant.
And that's why you do so much prep work. So it's like there's a screening, there's an assessment to ensure that that client is even ready for a journey like that. Like what we were saying the other day, like if somebody comes to me and they're like, yeah, I don't really know how to surrender, I would say, I'm not sure a medicine ceremony, heroic dose is what you need.
Yeah.
And I'm not the person to take them there,
Right.
you know? So that's like also my boundaries. And those things need to be talked about in the prep sessions, as well as using that time to be with the client and actually see how their nervous systems respond to certain words, certain movements, certain environments from a sober space.
What I'm getting from this is how having a medicine experience facilitated is an intimate experience.
Oh, it's wildly intimate.
And knowing that person, their triggers, their history, their traumas, the way that they may respond, how they respond, having that kind of level of depth of communication is so vitally important.
It's so important for both parties, because it's safety about the practitioner as well. And so by creating a rapport and creating an understanding, so when my client goes, hey, I can't go there, I'm not the one to say, well, you should try. Are you sure? Do you want to try?
So it's
you know, it's like there's absolutely. Sovereignty is such a big piece of that, especially because when you're in a psychedelic expanded state, boundaries tend to dissolve, intentions, expectations start to change. And so it's important to have like all of those things like agreed to ahead of time.
So there needs to be an understanding, an appreciation, and a respect of sovereignty before the boundaries of sovereignty begin to dissolve.
100%.
I love this for multiple reasons, one of which is because for me it reflects the pillars of conscious intimacy that we have at Sex.Prayers.
Yeah.
At Sex.Prayers Academy, we have truth, trust, communication, and empathy all on the foundation of play as our pillars of intimacy, and I feel like I'm hearing this here.
Yeah, trust is that opportunity to really build rapport. You know, truth is like what may come up, and to explore that in a mentally, emotionally sober place first. You know, understanding each other, being able to communicate, not using words or vocabulary that could potentially trigger a negative response. And also like empathy. So when a client is having a hard experience, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm not trying to guide them in a different direction because I'm uncomfortable or because I feel like they're uncomfortable, but rather just like being in the experience with them fully. That's like, wow, that must be challenging.
Right. Yeah. Having that depth of connection. Because essentially it sounds like in that experience, the person having the journey is surrendering part of their sovereignty to this facilitator who is holding the space for them and kind of being a proxy for the part of their ego that is dissolved. And so having...
Or struggling to dissolve.
Right, yeah.
Really clinging on there.
So having a deep, intimate relationship with that person's ego is necessary, because if you're being the proxy for them, knowing how they want to respond and be handled or dealt with and held.
Yeah, I think of this example where it's like, if I'm in a preparatory session and I will already start to see where the resistance around certain topics, certain things starts to show up. And so through prep work, we can navigate that. So that way, when the journey actually begins, which I'm not taking people on heroic doses at this stage of my life, but if I was, when that journey begins and I see the ego, we could have done some prep work to go, hey, okay, there's our ego, there he is, there she is, there they are. Let's welcome them and just like kind of create more of a dialogue between all the parts, all the parties that are inevitably going to reveal themselves during these states.
Yeah, there's so much there. Okay, so
I know.
what kind of time frame or period of connection are you working with that preliminary time?
Yeah, it depends.
It's
a
like
lot
10 minutes?
of no, like so many facilitators recommend several sessions. If you could do weeks of sessions, they really do recommend it. So it's essentially like you're treating it as therapy to understand what it is for all parties involved that you're working with, the energy that you're there to transmute or to transfigure or to discover more about, and then dropping into the ceremony or ceremonies.
Well, that's why self-awareness is so important, because if you have trauma but you don't know about it and it shows up in that space,
it's a liability for everybody involved.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to me, this feels like it mirrors the Pillars to Partnership program that we're doing in getting to not just go through the pillars, but understand oneself fully, to be able to have that sense of sovereignty, to then feel empowered to hand over a part of it to someone else. I feel like in the pursuit of partnership, so many people hand over their sexual energy to someone before they even really know them. And then no wonder it ends in challenge, because sex is kind of like a medicine journey. It has the power of that, at least.
Or confusion, because now you've just been penetrated by somebody that you're completely unfamiliar with their history, spiritually, energetically, emotionally. So yeah, it's interesting to bring that.
Especially with deep trauma.
Yeah, of course. Of course. And if you're numb or disassociated in any way, shape, or form, you might not even be aware that you're taking on that energy in that sense.
And then you have the trauma responses, and if you're with someone who isn't energetically, emotionally, spiritually sensitive to that, then they're not going to be able to hold you in that container. And that's whether that's partnership or whether it is in a medicine container. It's that sense of dual responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Okay. Anything else you want to share? What was the kind of... Okay, we had this, how do we know when to slow down and carry on?
I want to say something else too about this preparatory, because there are situations where Tulum is a great example of this. I call it drive-by spirituality, also like spiritual tourism.
Spiritual Hollywood.
Where people come in and they feel like medicine journeys are their last hope. They're desperate. They're only in town for a couple weekends, and they heard there's a ceremony, so they're just going to go do it. And the challenge that comes from that, what you just shared was a great example. Like, if you don't know you have traumas and then you just go to a bufo ceremony and nobody else knows that because they haven't done their due diligence to assess you, screen you, know if you're on certain medications, because not all medications work with psychedelics. They can actually cause a lot of damage and harm. Or the psychedelic experience won't work because of certain medications. So if we as facilitators or healers, practitioners, medicine women, shamans, et cetera, if we're not doing the due diligence to screen and assess and really get to know and understand that person, there is a huge probability for safety, for harm, for self-harm. And I see how also like integration is still a part of this. So we're talking a lot of prep.
Yeah.
We're talking the ceremony, which is actually the smallest part of the whole thing. And then there's also integration afterwards. So how are you bringing what you experienced into your everyday life? And the best way to have the best experience, whatever that is destined to be for you, is by doing this prep work and not by going, hey, yeah, I'm just going to pop into the ceremony and like, woo, let's go. Let's just see what happens.
Yeah.
That can be really
Dangerous.
harmful and dangerous to all
Yeah.
parties involved. So I'm just sharing this as a way for everybody that's watching this to consider that. Consider your facilitator, consider your healer, get to know them.
And if you're in a group container, like
Yeah.
the collective imprint or impact that can have.
Yeah.
That's why
Transference is
There-
real.
exactly.
Transference, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is where you're transferring your experience and your energy onto the other person or other people. They're feeling and receiving your energy. And in those moments in group settings, it can be really challenging, especially if you're not attuned to know what's yours and what isn't. And if
Right.
you become attached to something that isn't yours and then you spend the rest of your life trying to figure that out, it's just not. To me, I see these medicines as so sacred. And to me, experiences like that are not worth it.
you know what?
Even though there is collective healing. I'm not denying that element.
No, there's a risk.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I mean, I went to Costa Rica and had an ayahuasca retreat, went on an ayahuasca retreat, but I wasn't properly vetted. And to my own lack of due diligence, I didn't fully investigate the facilitation team. And
It sounded like when you shared that with me too, there was like a lot of just things that didn't quite feel right about that space.
yeah, and that was my desire to have an experience overwhelming my discernment. And,
Intuition in some ways.
I'm grateful that I went on it, even if it wasn't the best experience, because I got a lot from it, especially from the fact that it wasn't a great experience. I learned
There's a lot of teaching in that.
exactly, yeah. And I'm grateful. I knew that I could deal with what happened, and I still put myself at risk.
And not everybody has that same level of awareness
Right.
and intelligence
Exactly.
as you.
Yeah.
So
So
tuning
it is
in.
risky.
And this is why I'm such an advocate, y'all, for the education of this, because spiritual tourism is a real thing. Pseudo medicine shamans are a real thing, and they will come out there and they will take your money and they'll give you an experience and then just like
Leave you.
and go, great,
It's,
come back when you're ready for a second round.
Is this the new spiritual fuckboy?
Yeah, like the
Medicine fuckboy?
shaman fuckboy.
Yeah.
Or fuck girl. Sorry,
Yeah.
it's just fuckboy is the term. We're really not fuck girls running around. We're not calling them that. But they do exist. Shout out. So yeah,
It's
just
kind of like the shadow, right? It's the shadow
it is the
practitioner.
shadow. Yeah, and it's everything, right? Like psychedelic has its own light and it has its own shadow in the field.
Sure.
Capitalism has its own light and its own shadow. Everything has the duality
Relationship.
of those experiences. And again, that's just why I'm just going to stress like the importance of being aware of who you're working with, meeting them, getting comfortable, having a couple sessions to really explore. Because the last thing that I feel like anybody really truly wants is somebody that's unintegrated or has no fucking clue what they're doing. They just have medicine in their hand and they know how to serve it to you, into such an open, spiritual, psychedelic embodied state where your boundaries, your sense of self can and do dissolve depending on the medicine that you're taking. So safety should be of the utmost concern. It should be the most paramount discussion that anybody is having. And if at any point you have this experience that's like, I don't really know about this. If you have the space, take your time to make that decision and use your discernment. Because I've been in that situation I told you before where when I first walked in, I was like, absolutely not. This is not the vibe that I want to be taking this particular medicine in. But I stayed because I was in that space. And then after I watched this person facilitate the medicine to others, I got a feel for how he was working and what he was doing.
Right.
And I tuned into myself and I said, okay, I know this is feeling edgy, like how you're saying, and also a little bit risky, but like, how are you feeling overall? If something was to go off, do you feel like you have the resources and mental faculties to be able to support yourself in that? And when I tuned in, I went, yes, I do.
Yeah.
And I had a beautiful experience.
Yeah.
despite the environment, I had a really beautiful experience. I consider this guy a dear brother now. And it was an opportunity to also help him grow and develop around like how he's holding space. So I really believed in the power of that as well.
And there's such, to me, that speaks into the necessity for being as sovereign and as whole and as self-aware and self-assured as you can be, going into a space where you begin to dissolve all of that.
But not everybody feels like, and this has been such a topic of conversation, and I'm so grateful for this, because not everybody feels they have the time because they're up against their own shadows or depression or even like suicidal mentalities. And so when people feel rushed or desperate or they're in that energy, that's when it's like, okay, how do we kind of slow down, and how do we come back into like trusting that the person that you're showing up to for support is going to do what they can to the best of their ability to really truly offer that. And most least clinical practitioners will not go, okay, let's just have a ceremony and see what happens. They would actually say, hey, this isn't right. And of course there's the impact that can have on the potential client, because they're looking for help and they're looking for support and they feel like all they have left is this medicine ceremony, and there's the energy of rejection, and
there's
is something.
There's a way to go about that, right?
Yeah, there's a way to go about it. It's a skill that we have to develop as practitioners and cleaner as people, right? That's like to have empathy.
That's the pillars. That's, being able to learn those skills. To be able to, if sex is tantamount to a medicine journey, then all of the prep is transferable for one, but leading you into the position where you have the ability to step into that space.
And that's what I think the ideal setting is. The medicine wants it like that.
Right.
The medicine wants us to come into completion, into wholeness, and to dissolve our armor and feel that interconnectedness. And so if any part of the process is a little bit off or isn't really being honored with reverence and taken care of, then you're skewing the experience. Right. It could be something so much different. And I still trust, I trust the medicine on such a level that's like, if you are the type that's just like, go, drive by, let's get this spiritual hit and call it a day, and what happens, happens. Great. I trust in that process. Yeah.
You just might be lucky though, because there are some people where they go into psychosis and they don't come back.
Yeah.
Bad things happen. So,
of course.
So I guess for me, the takeaway is everything that you have, that you love, worth risking to go on and experience you don't know and the unknown.
And just to be like a little bit of the polarity of that, even as you say that, I'm like, I also trust that person going into psychosis for the greater purpose.
Sure.
Because there's something that needs to be looked at and examined there in order to develop the field, right? So, I mean, do I want people going into psychosis? Definitely not. And where it's such a, I still tell people all the time, like, psychedelics is still in its infancy. And so a lot of this is like trial and error and testing and collecting data in order to reduce harm. Like, that's number one priority. That's the conversation I keep hearing about, and that makes my heart like really sing, and it helps create safety, because harm reduction, support of the indigenous people and the land and their customs. So more to be talked about.
Much more, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry to have cut you off.
Thank you. No, that's okay. Busy. I have a call, so I can't keep talking about this anymore.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.